What's up? I'm recording this intro in my underwear and you can't tell. So welcome to episode 2 of my new interview series where I chat with musicians about what they do, how they got to where they are, and just about music and life in general. Today is a really awesome episode. I sat down and talked with my friend Harley Eblen, who is a cellist and a string arranger for indie folk music and some other genres as well. This was honestly just such a great conversation, and I tried to cut it down to be a little shorter, but I didn't want to cut anything out. It was just that interesting, and so I hope you guys enjoy as much as I do, because I'm loving making this series so far, because I just get to chat with really interesting people, and each time I come out feeling like I've learned so much, and it's just such a rewarding experience. But first, I do have to apologize for a couple issues here. I'm getting a little better, I think episode by episode at recording these things properly. It's a nightmare trying to get high quality recordings of these Zoom calls. I'm mostly happy with how this one turned out, but there were a few times when just for a couple minutes the video gets kind of choppy. Like the first minute is honestly kind of unwatchable, but I promise it gets better after that first minute, and then it's pretty much fine all the way through until we had to restart the call and the video cut out. So I don't know, I'm getting better at this every time. I'm learning about how this works. It's weirdly more complicated than it should be, so yeah, sorry for that. Bear with us for the first minute, because I promise it gets better right after. All right, anyways, let's get right into it. Hey everyone, I'm here with my good friend Harley Eblen. He's a cellist and he works on a bunch of different kind of indie folk, pop, different genres of string arrangements, and he's worked on a couple songs of mine. So why don't you just introduce yourself, tell us a bit about who you are, what you do.
Yeah, no, that was a great introduction. My name is Harley. I'm a cellist, and I feel super lucky to be doing what I'm doing. Absolutely stumbled into cello arranging, string arranging. And it's been such a pleasure to work on those two songs with you, man.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I'm super happy with the outcomes from both of those. So talk to me a bit about just your musical past. When did you start playing music? When did you fall in love with it, decide that was what you wanted to do?
Yeah, so for some reason, music has always really spoken to me. My mom said when I was a baby, I was 2 days old, she put on Stevie Ray Vaughan and I stopped breathing.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's always really triggered something in me. And it's it's hard to know and hard to explain. But I mean, I was lucky enough to go to a school that valued music education, which is a rarity these days. But they started us on recorder in first grade and did that whole thing. But for some reason, I remember being in first grade and being handed my first recorder and feeling like this is an important moment. So I don't know, music has always just held a really special place to me. But I started violin when I was 9 years old, and I started cello when I was 10 years old. Because cello sounded cooler, in my opinion, and you could sit down while playing. So it's been a part of my entire life.
So moving into high school, what were you doing musically then?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of give a brief overview because that was all kind of twisty for me. So I studied classical cello from the time I was 10 years old through about 16 or 17. I was playing in youth symphony through all that time. I was trying to work my way up through the levels of the youth symphony, and I topped out at second chair of the second orchestra. So that was very I'm not still bitter about that. Only a little bit. But
Slap
so
in the face there.
Yeah, but I was doing that, and I stopped being as enamored with classical music because what I always loved about the cello is just the visceral expression.
Right.
And studying classical music, I really remember, I looked back through my old Bach books recently, and at the top of one of the pages, it just says less emotion, or stop having fun, or something like that, in my child scrawl. And it's kind of heartbreaking to me to think about it, but that was
for real,
what that classical education was. So I stopped being enamored with it, and I discovered weirdly Scottish fiddle music,
Right. Okay.
which was kind of a plot twist. But there's this duo. They're still performing. We just saw them last week, actually. I've known them for over a decade now. But Alistair Fraser and Natalie Haas, I saw Natalie perform and like do things with the cello that I never imagined possible. And that sent me off towards Scottish, Celtic, folk, bluegrass music on the cello.
Right.
I spent years going to camps and festivals and all of that. Found my way into writing songs and doing the singer-songwriter thing. And through that, kind of came out the other side looking to produce and stumbled into string arranging through that. So it's been a journey of like classical music, improvisational styles, songwriting, learning the building blocks of how songs and that form works. Because it's not something that you learn in classical music.
Yeah.
And then
not at all.
applying all of those different eras of my life as a cellist to the song form, which is kind of how I ended up where I am.
Right. To me, that makes a lot of sense. I like it's the switch out of classical that is like kind of the more unique one, but after that I think the route, to me at least, just seems kind of like linear. Like it makes sense to me, like that each thing would follow after the other.
Yeah, I mean I've done work to make it sound linear, and it's that
Right,
it's that
okay.
kind of thing where like in the moment everything feels like an existential crisis and a failure of yourself as a person, or at least that's how I experience these things. I don't know if that's everyone, but
Right, okay.
in hindsight, it's really easy to draw that line.
Yeah. So when in that progression, did you think that you wanted to start doing music like professionally?
You know, that's interesting because I feel like that was, through most of it, a static assumption. Like,
Okay.
I was like 10 years old and I thought that I wanted to be Yo-Yo Ma.
Right.
And then I was like, maybe I want to be a conductor. Maybe I want to be a composer. Maybe I want to be like first chair in an orchestra. And then I was like, oh no, I want to be in like a Celtic dance band playing cello. But it was always,
Okay.
except for the period of time that I kind of glossed over where I quit music for 2 years.
Right.
Except for that, part of quitting music was like, I don't know if I can handle doing this professionally. Why do it at all? So I always wanted to do it professionally. But in the last year and a half is when I got clarity around how I wanted to do that for the first time.
You've been open, I think, a bit about like that time where you decided to quit music, or at least temporarily. Was there something in particular that like drove you there, either music related or not music related?
Yeah, so it was a little bit of both. I was in a relationship at the time, and music and that relationship were extremely tied together. Like we kind of came up through the fiddle scene together and performed together, and like my identity as a musician had become very tied to this relationship. And I was living in Boston for a little bit in a house with like a bunch of my favorite musicians in the world, and I just like kind of got the sense that the relationship was no longer the right fit, and that like I felt out of my depth in that house and that community. And so it was just kind of this moment where I was like, I was being dramatic and like, I don't know, 21, and decided to just blow up my entire life and say, screw everything. I'm a new person.
Right.
And then I realized that it doesn't have to be that extreme, and that music is really a core part of who I am.
Right. No, that's understandable. Yeah. This is not about myself, so I'm not gonna go into how much I relate to that. But I feel you there.
You know, every time I tell that story, people are like, oh yeah, I've got that.
Yeah. No, I'm that totally understandable. And then then what got you back into it? What made that decision?
It was really interesting. I was selling my cellos. I wanted them like out of my life. I wanted to backpack full time. I was like, I'm going to be a blogger and podcaster and like live on the road. I'm going to go to Iceland.
Yeah, sounds cool.
And, I mean, it was great. And I did that, and it was a wonderful experience, but I wanted to sell my cellos as a part of shedding that skin, and also to like have some money so that I could do those things. And a friend of mine is a luthier and instrument dealer. And I went to him and asked, do you know anyone? He said, I had 2 cellos at the time. He's like, I would take one of them, but I don't have cash for the whole thing. Check out this old guitar. and he just like handed me a 1947 Martin. And I didn't really know how to play guitar at the time, but I like started playing it, and he like taught me a few things, and I was listening to it, and I just like fell in love with the sound, and that guitar's like hanging in the
No
closet
way.
right next to me. Yeah, so I ended up taking that guitar as a partial trade for one of the cellos, and like it just, I feel like that guitar taught me new things about music. Like I feel like we've all had the experience of like an instrument coming into our hands and being like, oh, this is something special. And that was that for me. So I had like a 4 or 5 year love affair, like journey with that guitar, where I feel like I learned a lot about songwriting and new types of music from it.
Okay. So was that the point where you transitioned more into like more into writing your own songs and producing and stuff, or did that start before then, or was that like the start of it?
So that was the start of it.
Okay.
I had never written a song before. And I remember like sitting down with the guitar and being like, how do I write a song? And then I would like not figure it out. And then I would sit down at a piano. I'm like, I don't know how to play this, but how do I write a song? And I ended up, actually, I was sitting down at a piano and trying to figure out how to write a song. And I got a call saying, are you coming to camp? And I was like, it was a camp actually that I had been to many times, and it's a really big part of my life, in Big Sur, California. And I was like, I wasn't invited. I'm not signed up. And she was like, we need your help in the kitchen. I can pick you up in 45 minutes if you want to go. And so I just like kind of like got a bag together and like went out into the driveway and hopped in the car, and went down to Big Sur. And it just so happened that they were doing like one of the tracks that year was like writing songs.
Oh, that's wild.
And so I just like got to sit in a room and learn songwriting from some really phenomenal musicians.
We'll talk a bit now, because it seems like if we're going kind of chronologically, you have a fair amount of solo music out there. Is like that EP released, and your single after that. Well, first of all, I think you posted like a story recently or something that you were looking like you were trying to write more songs, something. Is that something that we can like look forward to sometime soon?
Yeah, I'm in the process. I've got 3 that I'm actively working on. I wrote them about a year to. I mean, these 3 songs I wrote between like 2 years and like 5 years ago, probably. So they've been sitting, but I feel like the part of my story that we haven't really gotten to, like the last few years, has really changed my approach to music. There was some strength in my writing then, that I'm out of practice with now. Like there was just like, I was in the habit of expressing myself and editing in that sense.
Right. Okay.
And I love the songs that I created in that moment, but I didn't know how to produce. So I started like making rough demos and not knowing how to do it. And then I kind of learned to produce by working on these, and then coming back to them now has been really interesting. So yeah, I'm working in the background on some of the stuff I've written in the past. And it's been really fun.
I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, for anyone watching, like I love Harley's songs. I know it. Like I know you haven't like released a lot of stuff recently, but like when I first met you, like I think you had released all the songs that like up until now. Oh, except for Red Moon Night with Dominic. But
but yeah.
But yeah, anyway, so you had a bunch of songs, and like I checked them out because I was like, who the heck is this guy? And I was very impressed. So anyways, I recommend check out Harley's music, and I really hope that we're getting some new stuff soon. But yeah,
I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, no, please do. Yeah. So anyway, so I mean, from there, was that ever like, because now I don't think I explicitly said it yet, but like now you're working mostly doing like string arrangements for other artists. So now I guess we'll talk about the transition into that, because at that point when you were writing these songs and you released like that EP and stuff, was that like the direction you were looking to go in? Yeah,
totally.
And that so talk me through how that transition happened.
So I hadn't played cello in years. And I was like playing guitar and recording and releasing these songs. And I was like, I am going to be a solo singer-songwriter. The world is going to hear what I have to say. This is important. My healing process is going to be someone else's healing process. Like I was doing that whole thing with no plan. And I ended up getting the song I See You. I released that, got on some playlists. It did a little more than my EP had done. And I got contacted by someone on Instagram We hopped on a call, and he's a music business coach. And I was just thinking, oh, I'll hear what he has to say, but I know what I'm doing. Like, this will be interesting. And he basically kindly tore me a new one, and asked like what my plan was, and I didn't have good answers.
Right.
And I said, I want to do this professionally. He's like, how are you going to get there? And it freaked me out, and I like couldn't sleep for a week, and I like wanted to quit music again. And I was like, okay, who's this guy? Like, how did he get to me so quickly? Like, what if this is him putting his story on me, and what if this is me and my insecurity and lack of direction? And I realized a lot of it was me and my insecurity and lack of direction.
Right.
And he challenged me to find a service that I could offer in the music industry, in order to grow a business around that could then support my own work if I so chose to continue doing that. And that was a moment where I made a switch, that I realized I love expression. I love music. But one of the things that would make me feel most fulfilled in music is making a living from it. And that was,
yeah.
But it was a really interesting moment where I was like, do I care more about these songs and sharing them, or about making a living? And that was a gut-wrenching decision. And it's not necessarily one that you have to make in every situation, but I had come to a point where it did feel like a binary choice. And I realized that getting to work on other people's music was fulfilling, and that I genuinely enjoyed it. And I chose that. But as you mentioned, ironically, like those connections and those relationships, like there are now a couple different producers around the world that I'm working with on my own stuff, but that's from it coming full circle and me first finding a way to be of service.
Right. No, okay, that's awesome. I mean, hey, this business coach, he gave you some good advice there, really, huh? Like that's Dude, wild.
Like, honestly, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have a business in music if he hadn't challenged me on that. So I'm awesome. Unbelievably grateful.
And he was just like, he just reached out to you on Instagram.
Yeah.
Wow. Because I get like a lot of those, and a lot of them, the majority of them are obviously sketchy and just, but then, but there's some of these I get where like, it's always, hey, I can help you like grow as an artist. Let's have a chat. Like some of them I'm like, okay, maybe this is like actually worth sitting down and doing. I don't know. And so apparently the answer is yes, sometimes they can be.
I mean, honestly, my rule now after experiencing that is I'll never say no. Like if someone wants to talk, like even if I'm pretty sure they're full of it and like won't have anything to offer, and I'm like, I probably know more than this person, but I'm like, honestly, like I can spend 15 minutes, I can spend 30 minutes and see. Maybe we'll end up being friends. Maybe they'll say something on the call that reflects something back at me that I can grow from. Or maybe not, but like it's enjoyable. And also I would feel hypocritical not saying yes when part of what I do is ask people to hop on calls and talk about their music with me.
Well, actually, I mean, let's talk about that, because I know that's a big part of what you do. I guess what got like us working together is just you showed a lot of interest in like what I was doing, and that made me interested to work with you. And I think like our relationship kind of like built from there. Like now when I'm like stuck in a song, like I'm gonna come to you and ask for some help, and I know you have that relationship with like a billion artists, because I think like, obviously you're an amazing cello player and string arranger, and we're going to talk more about that, but also like you've developed a really good skill of like connecting with people. And I think like business wise, that's just such an incredibly important skill.
Well, I feel like there's two parts to that. The first part is it's really easy when I actually care about someone's music. Like when I heard your music, I was genuinely like, this guy is really pushing himself. I can tell, like I could hear your influences in your work. Like I listened to your song. I think Indigo is the first thing I heard of yours. And I was like, I hear Novo Amor in this. And we talked about Novo Amor.
That's right.
And like, that's one of the things I love doing. I love like reflecting someone's influences back to them and seeing if they knew that that was a part of
Right.
their
Yeah.
music and if that is actually a shared connection or not, or if it's just an assumption.
Mm.
But like we bonded over like loving Novo Amor.
Yeah.
And like, so it's, and I saw that you were working hard and doing good work and
Mm.
wanting to grow. So it's like, it's really easy for me to just
Yeah.
be able to like care because it's real. Like
Right.
I love getting to lift other people's music up. Like it genuinely fulfills me.
Yeah.
And the second part of it is learning the interaction, like learning how to express that was a huge challenge. And it
Mm.
was like, it took me like probably 9 months of it feeling terrifying and like a grind
Right.
before it felt authentic. So it's both like I had to genuinely care and then I had to learn to do the hard work of it.
Right.
But once those things came together, things started flowing more naturally.
Yeah. The reason I mention it is just like that well, one, it's like the most crucial skill, like for not just musicians, but for people in general to one genuinely care and like and
Yeah.
two to be able to communicate. But like it's also I think in a lot of ways it's a lot like it's what music is about. Like
Yeah.
it's like I mean like for me and like I'm in this kind of sad indie space, but it doesn't matter. Like when I was talking with Charles, we talked about how like EDM music is a way for people to connect. You know, you go to a club and you dance and you connect. It like
Totally.
across the entire spectrum, it's all it like it has music has just this beautiful way of bringing people together and
Yeah.
like you know I don't know where I'm going with it, but just like being able to do that and like really seeing it happen and like seeing these connections being created, whether like online, in person, whatever. It's just such an awesome thing.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, like I mostly a lot of the music I work on is like that space you're talking about, like kind of the sad
Yeah.
indie, the folk, the pop, like piano ballady stuff. But like, I don't know. I listen to a lot of Dua Lipa. Like
Yeah.
I listen to like pop bangers. I put that on in the kitchen. Like I like go cook dinner. I'm like blasting some like I literally have a playlist on Spotify called Big Bangers. And like
Nice.
it's 90% of what I listen to. Cause like I spend
Nice.
my day
Yeah.
with this other music and I'm like, I want the balance. But then like my girlfriend comes home and I'm cooking dinner and like just like kind of dance in the kitchen and like it's deep music on a different level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Let's talk more about like the work you do now. So I don't know. We've kind of introduced it a little bit, but like talk me through, I guess, what is a string arrangement? What do you do when you work with someone, you get a song? What's your goal? What's your
Yeah.
process?
Yeah, so the first thing that I like doing, either through conversation or listening to the song, ideally both, is figure out what the intention of the song is. What are the artist's goals for this song? How do they want it to connect to listeners? What do they want it to trigger inside them? Like one of my favorite notes that I've ever gotten is we want we want this song to make people cry but not kill themselves. I'm like, okay, there we go. That's a line I can walk. Like I understand that space.
Yeah.
But like
Descriptive. Yeah.
and I actually found that note really helpful in my
Mhm.
process because my process is very emotion based.
Yeah.
But so I'll get the rough mix. And in that case, so I got a rough mix from the client. And they basically said, we want people to cry when they hear this. This needs emotion, this needs movement, and it needs glue. And that's often what I try to put in to what
Right.
I'm doing. I listen through the track. I'll usually lay out markers. I'll make notes for myself. I will get notes from the client. Sometimes I'll go through and like mark out specific beats as like, I want cellos to come in here. I want it to drop out here. I want to emphasize this moment. I'll go through and listen for lyrics that stand out to me. And I love this thing in music, kind of like onomatopoetic instrumental work.
Okay.
Phoebe Bridgers is a great
Mm.
example. The song, oh God, da, 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 da. I'm forgetting.
Uh,
Phoebe,
is that Scott Street?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Scott Street. Thank you. I knew we'd get there. But the line "helicopters over my head." Her guitarist does this crazy thing, and it feels like a helicopter flying over.
Wait, is that a guitar? I thought it was
It's
a
a guitar.
helicopter.
It's a guitar.
Oh, no way. That's
But
so
like
awesome.
that kind of thing influenced me a lot. So I'll go through and
Okay,
I'll
yeah.
listen for lyrics, and it's like,
Mm.
okay, there's a like something about like I'm gonna cry when we dance or something, and I'm like, okay, what does that feel like? What does that sound like? How do I express that in cello? Because there's a gap in the lyrics. So like I'll go through and kind of do that emotional work, that digging, and kind of get the feel for what I want to do. And my tracking template, I just drag the client's rough mix in, and it's like 20 blank tracks.
Right.
And I just hit record on one of them and try something.
Right.
And then I hit record on the next one and try something else. And I will literally just do that over and over, either for an hour or 3 hours or like a week or two, whatever it takes for that given song and the process it needs to follow. But I'll just do that until things come together and it has the movement it needs. It has the emotional weight or levity that it needs. And I feel like there is no more expression that I and my work can pull out of the song.
Okay. Yeah, I remember like you've said that before that your process is like quite improvisational. And like have you ever worked with sheet music on any of like the songs that you've worked on?
You know, a couple of times.
Okay.
But even those, the conversation was like, here's what I wrote. See what you think. Like,
right.
And that was specific to that artist I was working with. It was more like it was an instrumental set of songs for like sync licensing, focused on like TV. Yeah, so there have been a few times where I've worked with sheet music, but it's honestly it's a challenging process. In a way, I appreciate. I feel like every time I've sat down to work with parts that are already written, it forces me to grow as a musician because there's less that I can lean on in my own instinct. And it's like, all right, I have to work to get inside what this person wrote. Like I have to practice this to get it to a point where it feels like authentic expression.
Right.
But I tell people, like, if you have written parts, if there's a specific thing you're hearing and you want played, I might not be the best cellist for it. Like, and in fact, I'm like probably not the best cellist for it.
Interesting.
Because it's just that is more rooted in classical technique and precision. Yeah. And honestly, that's just something I don't have anymore. I focus on emotion in my playing over precision. And then part of the revision process is to get it right.
Yeah, right. Okay. I can relate to that a lot. Like because I add violins to a lot of my songs, and like you're a much better cellist than I am violinist. I'm very, very out of practice, and like but like I do a billion takes before it sounds right. But I totally agree that kind of just playing is like how I get most of like the best ideas that I have.
Yeah,
which I think is so cool. I guess this kind of makes sense based on what you're saying, but like I guess what you say usually like the notes that artists will give you, they'll mostly be they won't be quite as much like musical notes. Like here, I want this kind of phrase. It's more of like, I guess a little more abstract, a little like more emotion based. Yeah.
Yeah. I love sitting in the abstract notes. I feel like a lot of string players like run from the abstract notes because it's like, it's not part of that training, but like I put myself through this like really weird self-training thing. And like part of me wanted to be a therapist. My mom's a therapist. And so like, I'm honestly more comfortable sitting in like heavy emotion than I am sitting in sheet music. Maybe that's something I need to work through in therapy, but like it's interesting. Like if you tell me, like, again, that example, like I want to make people cry, but not want to kill themselves. I'm like, okay, I know exactly what I'm going to do.
Right.
Like pretty much immediately. And that's like, that's weird. It's weird that I hear that.
Yeah.
But I enjoy that.
Yeah. No, that's, I mean, because, what like what we're saying about like shying away from the abstract, that's very rooted in classical education and performance. Like that's the way it is. And like, when I say these things, sometimes it sounds like I'm shitting on classical music, which I'm really not. Like I'm in a classical program, and I love classical music and classical
Yeah.
musicians. I have so much respect for them. But like improvisation and like honestly, thinking outside the box is just not really emphasized that much. It is it's quite rigid, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because there's like there's a space for that in like orchestras
Totally.
and that
Yeah.
orchestras create beautiful music, but there it's also there's also a space for everything else,
Yeah.
and I part of me like I'm thinking so much about music education all the time because I'm studying music currently, but like I wish there was more of a space for that. I wish like because like I feel like anybody who does something kind of similar to what you're doing kind of explores it on their own, you know.
Yeah. And that's interesting that you point that out because I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing
No,
because like
no.
there's part of the reason I stepped away from classical music is I just like straight up couldn't cut it as a classical musician.
Hmm.
Like the way I approached it, like the way I wanted to interface with music, like I was not good enough and could never be good enough to make
Yeah,
it as a classical cellist.
they're serious.
Yeah. And I had to come to terms with the fact that that's not the direction that lit me up anymore.
Yeah, well, because it has to be. Like
It has to
in
be.
order to practice that much every day and
Yeah.
become that damn good at just at like playing something perfectly, like that has to be exactly what you want to do.
Yeah. So I mean to get to where I've found myself, if I had seen a program that's like learn string arranging and home recording, I'd be like, that sounds dumb. Like that
Hmm.
doesn't sound interesting. Like, so I wouldn't have even sought this out if it had been something that was taught.
Okay.
I had to like find my way through it and just find like the next thing that lit me up over and over the course of like the last decade.
Right.
Where it was like, oh, I'm sitting in with this Hawaiian musician and playing cello, and he's just like calling out what key the song is in before playing something I've never heard and we're on live TV. Oh, also he called out the wrong key. Like I was like, okay. But like I did that for a while and that
Yeah,
was
yeah.
like that lit me up. I was like that moment being on stage, there was a camera, there was these people, I didn't know the song, and he's like, take a solo. I'm like, okay, let's do this. Like that made me feel alive until
Right.
it didn't. And then I was like, all right, like learning percussive cello playing and rhythm and like doing this, like this makes me feel alive until it didn't. But there was always looking to the next thing. And like I said, it's been like a really weird journey getting here, but like all of these different skills come into play. Like I'll be listening to a song and I'm like, oh, this needs like some kind of like Celtic ornamentation here. Like, okay, boom, I'll put that in. It's like, oh, this needs like this kind of chord movement. And I think through like theory classes in college, and I'm like, okay, like don't want
Yeah.
parallel fifths. I'm like trying to do this. I'm like, oh, the voice leading's off. I'm like, okay, let's do that. Boom. All right, that feels good. Move on. And then I'm like, oh, this like line that they wrote like really just kind of breaks me. And then I'm like, all right, let's think about all the times I've been in therapy. Like, how do we talk through this? How do I feel? Like, what's sitting inside that emotion? And then I'm like sitting in this chair right here, like kind of like tearing up. And then I'm like, okay, let's do this. Like,
I love that. I love that it's not just like the musical things that you've learned and experienced. It's the life stuff as well. Like it almost sounds cliche at this point, but like it's just so true. Like I feel like life experience is just as
yeah,
important as like musical experience and knowledge. Like
you
yeah.
know, I took a workshop from Victor Wooten. It was a 3-day workshop. Victor Wooten is like one of the best musicians alive, in my opinion. He's a bass player. If any of you have never heard his music, like go like pause this video, go listen to his music right now. But I took a workshop from him, and he's one of the most grounded human beings I've ever encountered. He's just one of those people. He walks into the room, and everyone's just like, okay. And something that he said in that workshop that has always stuck with me is that you can hear when someone spends all their time in a practice room because they don't have life experience to play about.
Right.
He said, once you have the fundamentals of your instrument and you can confidently and comfortably express yourself on your instrument, you need experience to express.
Right.
And as a kid, I took that as license to not practice.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Which is one direction to take that. But like as an adult, like I feel like I've finally found a place with my instrument where I know how to express what I'm feeling and a modality in which I can do that. And so now a lot of it is about drawing on life experience and having life experience.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I almost forgot. There's one question I'm asking everyone. So the question is very simple, and also impossible to interpret in one way. So, like what I want you to do is kind of first thing, what do you think the question means? And then second of all, like, what's your answer to it? So question, is music universal?
Whoa, that is a big one.
Yeah.
I mean, my gut instinct is obviously. I often say that cello is my first language because playing this instrument is where I learned to express myself before I really knew how to express myself in words. So to me, music and language are inextricably tied together. And in isolation, I already think that music is universal because to my knowledge, it's something that every culture has embedded in it. But also when I started studying voice, not that I can sing to save my life anymore, I started realizing that speaking is the same modulation, the same series of pitches and shapes and sounds. Singing and speaking are exactly the same. It's just a matter of degree.
Right.
So I feel like music is just so tied to communication. And playing the cello is the first way I ever learned to, that feeling you have when you like want to express something and there are no words for it and there is no name, there is no one way to put it out of you. The first way I learned to channel that was by playing cello. And I feel like that is so much of what music is for artists, for creators, for writers, for producers, and for listeners, for the people that experience it. It's always been on the side of playing the cello for me that I've processed that. But I know for a lot of people, it's experiencing music, it's listening to music. So I think music is extremely universal.
All right, that just about does it. That was such an amazing conversation, and like I genuinely can't express enough like just how much I'm loving doing this series and just learning from these awesome people. So thank you so much for watching, and if you like this kind of content that I make and you want to help me continue to make this content, please consider supporting me on my Patreon, which I've launched really recently. I post a lot of exclusive content there, like updates, early access to some of my songs, demos, things like that, unreleased stuff. And I plan also to be posting some bonus content from some of the kind of more like informational videos that I focus more on here on YouTube. So anyways, if you want to go check me out down there, it's the first link in the description because YouTube won't let me put links in the video because I don't have enough subscribers, because that makes sense. So check it out, first link in the description. I appreciate it so much. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.